Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Church Advance podcast with Brian and Luke. Man, great to have you guys back today. We want to keep talking a little bit about the upcoming September 30th launch of Church Advance HQ, which is a subscription-based opportunity to be in a more intentional relationship with both myself and Luke so that we can help you in a more strategic and specific way. And we talk about the three different benefits that you get from this subscription. You get number one, the conference, February 6 and 7, 2025. You get number two, coaching, which is 30 minutes per week for the first 3 months that your subscription lasts with either me, Luke, or our friend Nate Skelly, or any combination of the three. And then finally, we're going to talk about the courses. And I'm really excited about this. These are going to be, Luke, unreleased courses that are not for public consumption, but these are going to be video-based courses that you get access to with your subscription to Church Advance HQ. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about your videos, and then I'll talk about a few of the other ones that are going to be available immediately.
Yeah. So on my side of things, we've got videos and courses about how to effectively record video. How do you set up an affordable, kind of studio setup with lighting and audio and video? Then how do you, take that and make sure you have a good distribution plan and so forth. We talk about we do a full series on rethinking your website. We do a full series about how to hire a creative professional. All of these, and there's more, but those are just a few of the big ones. And Brian, like you said, we could talk a little bit about some of the stuff you've got, but I do know one of the things we're excited about is the content from H.B. Charles.
Oh, yes.
Which we captured back at Church Advance 2024. And it was so good that, Brian, you and I immediately said, this is valuable. We love and we always will help church leaders through our podcast and other things. We'll help people at no charge. But this is so valuable that we have to do something with it. And so that's what we've chosen to do, is to place that as a part of Church Advance HQ. I'm not a pastor, and I was just like soaking it all in. It was so rich.
Yeah, it's gospel gold. HB is inarguably an authority in expository preaching. He's a great preacher, my personal favorite preacher. And him talking for 3 or 4 hours about the nature of expository preaching and how it affects pastoral ministry is literally a brilliant piece. And he does much work in this field. We're getting ready to be at the conference, which is right around the corner here at his national conference. And so that's going to be great. And then there's a few others that I'm really excited about. And this will be an ever-expanding library.
Yes.
But a couple other ones is that Nate and Kurt Skelly are putting together a 8-week series on money. I believe they're calling it Money Wise. And from a biblical stewardship perspective, that's going to be included, at least for the leader, that you can take in this material. Obviously, if you want to use it as a small group study, license it for your church, that's something you can work out with Nate. But the ability for you to absorb the material yourself is included. I'm going to start with a course called 16 Weeks Through the Bible that I'm actually currently doing at my church. And each week, those videos will be added to this content as well. Super excited about that, man. It's just a panoramic view. In fact, that's what we're calling it, panorama. From start to finish, from Genesis to Revelation. How's the Bible put together? What is the Bible? Who wrote the Bible? All just kind of a big, really Bible college type course on what is the Bible, and doing that in 16 weeks. So that's just a start. There's going to be much more added, but these are going to be yours to access and use when you are a member of Church Advance HQ. Can't wait, man. Looking forward to it. September 30th. You guys get signed up and enjoy this podcast episode, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining us for this episode. And I do want to remind you to make sure that you are following us on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you may listen to podcasts. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/@churchadvance. And you can actually watch video versions of each episode. We'd also really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star review and share this content with other pastors and church leaders. We want to help as many of these folks as we can. And so we'd really appreciate you sharing this episode with your friends. Well, thanks again for joining us as we begin today's episode and continue to advance a reformation of fellowship, partnership, and gospel hope amongst Bible believing pastors and churches. This is Church Advance with Brian Sams. What is kind of your story and how you transition the worship style there at River City?
Yeah, absolutely. It started right away. And I can take you all the way back to the beginning. So when I got here, the worship was exactly everything you can imagine that was independent fundamental Baptist, but worse because it was bad. It was bad. The philosophy was bad. The production was bad. The leader was bad. The visuals, it was all bad. I mean, when I walked in the auditorium for the first time, the projector for the screen was broken and it was dangling. It was just hanging there by cords. Obviously, there were no screens. The song leader was incredibly awkward, best way I can put it, just absolutely. I mean, let me tell you a quick story about that. So I think it was our first July 4th service. I'd been talking to him. He actually had a nice voice, but he was just incredibly awkward with just standing there leading. He would say weird things. He would do weird things. And I was trying to help him. And I had several meetings with him. I said, Steve, look, man, you need to loosen up a little bit. You're making it uncomfortable for you and for others. We need to be more welcoming. It needs to be more natural, this kind of thing. So at that time, this is how so long ago this was, because I would still have done something then that I would never do now. We sang a song one Sunday on 4th of July called The Patriots Honor. Now, you may remember this from back in the West Coast days. It's an old Matt McMorris song. He probably wishes it wouldn't be attached to his name anymore, but it's one of those classic America, Jesus, kind of thing.
Jesus was an American. Yes, amen.
Yeah, it has all the vibes of, and it's about revival. It's about bringing God back.
Yeah.
It's not a terrible thing, but anyways. So it was a well done song when it was done. Well, there's this line that says, "And I'm so thankful for those who stand up for the red, white, and blue." And so I asked Steve if he'd sing the song, and I had already gone through this coaching with him about loosening it up and kind of just belting it out because he could sing real well. So he gets to that line, and again, he is just stiff as a board, microphone held just perfectly like he was trained at his IFB school. And when he got to that line, "I'm so thankful for those who stand up for the red, white, and blue," he just took his hand and just swung it out and pointed at the flag. And it was just this.
Thanks for trying, Steve.
Yeah. So, there was stuff like this going on. So, okay. So in the Q&A time, this is when I went to candidate. This is the Saturday night before the Sunday. In fact, this weekend, we're recording this in July. I don't know when it releases, but I'm in 4 days. I celebrate my 8th year anniversary here. So this was this time 8 years ago. This is all happening. We're in a Q&A Saturday night before the Sunday that they candidated me, July 24th. And which actually, it is July 24th today. What I'm telling you happened 8 years ago today, probably back in time. So, the church gathered. There's about 30 people that wanted to go through Q&A with me that Saturday night. He was there. And basically, one of the questions was essentially, what do you think we need to change right away to become more effective? And I just looked right at Steve and I said, Steve, look, the music, we've got to make some adjustments in the music. It's not good. The very first song we ever sang that day was "Come and Dine." Come and dine, the master called it, come and dine. Sunday morning, first song.
Yeah, you've made it clear that's one of your favorites. I remember us talking about this on the podcast before. It's up there
Oh
on
my
your
goodness! So
top
I've
charts.
never sung that again. So, and it was, and we had a choir, about 10 members. with a little small makeshift orchestra, a woman playing piano who couldn't play flats. It was a mess. And I just said, we've got to do this better. Within the first month, I had started introducing some newer songs, and we're talking about like just stuff that wasn't in the hymn book. I mean, like even
Mhm.
simple choruses. I mean, that's how far we were.
Yeah.
So, and then I removed the choir because they were so bad and people didn't want to practice. People were having bad attitudes about it. So I walked in one day and said, "We're done with choir. If we're going to do something, we're going to do it right." And and I didn't really have a bunch of. I think they were relieved. I think the people were
Mhm.
doing it out of habit. I didn't. Uh, but then, so it was Aaron Chan coming.
Mhm.
Okay, which happened about 4 weeks later, and he brought the music up a level because of his dynamic piano playing,
Yeah.
honestly. So
Yeah.
part of it was just stylistically some things needed to change. Part of it was having able people to do what we wanted to do. Then it was song selection slowly and surely. So all that began to happen like right away.
Mm.
Right away. And the funny thing was the church had no aversion to Southern gospel concerts. They had Southern gospel people. In fact, that weekend, the weekend they voted for me, they had a Southern gospel trio right there
Yeah.
singing. Uh, so it was like the people, what they did in public was predominantly hymns, but anytime you're in a church that is willing to have Southern gospel quartet or something sing, there's room there.
Yeah. And
You
I
know,
think you're describing 95% of congregations, even at independent Baptist churches. I mean,
absolutely,
I grew up at independent Baptist church, and just about everybody I knew, we're singing hymns and piano only, again, orchestra maybe in church, but in the car, they're jamming out to Casting Crowns and Hillsong. I mean,
absolutely,
that's,
absolutely.
so
I mean, I asked a kid, this was probably 3 years ago, a kid that I knew that was actually going to West Coast Baptist College. And I said to him, I said, man, he was talking about the same stuff. And I said, how many kids there, listen to contemporary Christian K Love and use modern translations? He just started laughing. He's like, everybody. Um, and the point, it just needed somebody to say, okay, this is okay in church.
mhm.
Yeah, like if we're gonna listen to it everywhere but church, what's the big deal? And it's a bad message. But that wasn't my messaging. I didn't really message anything. I never really said anything about it. I just started introducing songs. Obviously, we took the choir away. Wasn't very long before we had a team of people that were singing and playing. Kind of like the classic worship team, the front line, which is kind of an
Mhm.
old school thing now. But then it was about mostly visuals and style and song selection, really. Honestly, it was song selection for the longest time. We were just implementing new songs. Then when we moved to the new campus, it was a new visual. It was some different people. That's the first time I think we had a bass guitar. Uh, we had some skilled people with electric guitars. And honestly, that stuff just kind of came in seamlessly. Like it just wasn't a big deal.
Hmm.
We added the drum, the cajon. Nobody, it was just not an issue. So it was philosophical, but I didn't like teach. I didn't have to. It was kind of already there. It was just they wanted something fresh. It was just more for me. It was more the practical steps of replacing personnel, adding new personnel, and just introducing new material. And before, I mean, that was of all the things I dealt with here, of all the transitioning, that was the least problematic of anything that I did. And for a lot of people, I mean, you'd have to be, I would say, in like a real serious, like Bob Jones church
Mhm.
to not be able to have a bass guitar, to not be able
Mhm.
to have some kind of drum, even if it's like with an orchestra, some kind of
Yeah.
percussion. I mean, an acoustic guitar, a guy leading, like who, like in what world is that still like an issue?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so, but there are those people out there, and if you're in that kind of church environment, I mean, look, we're just, that's fine, but that's not where I'm at, and not where the overwhelming majority of people
Yeah.
are.
Yeah.
It's certainly a what do they call that's a subculture of IFB. That's a whole
Yeah.
new thing. That's like
Yeah.
David Cloud stuff.
Yeah.
Uh,
Our boy.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you're in a culture where you know that's the majority of what people listen to, anyways, you might have one or two haters, so to speak. I know my friend Thomas Shepard had some challenges as he was implementing particularly new songs. But
Mm.
again, they were Bob Jones people.
Yeah.
That's where their background was from.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, no matter what you're doing in leadership, you've got to be willing to have thick skin
Hmm.
and endure those kinds of questions and challenges. But ultimately, you have to do just like anything else. You got to do
Yeah.
what you know the Lord wants you to do. But I think it was easy to implement newer song selection and
Yeah.
instrumentation, replacing people that were worn out, things that weren't going to work
Yeah.
anymore. So, I mean, before I mean, we've only been what we are now, like what you see at River City now. Definitely since we've been on this campus. So the first 2 years, there wasn't much of that just because it just wasn't possible. But in
Hmm.
the last 6 years, that's been more pronounced and
Yeah.
clear.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And I think if nothing else, kind of like you said, like you said, the instruments issue can be something that, if nothing else, is going to be jarring to certain people.
yeah,
And Brian, I think you've already alluded to this. Like, you're going to lose somebody. Somebody's going to leave. I mean, unless
absolutely.
you're in a just microscopic congregation. I mean, if you have a
Yeah.
congregation of more than 50 people, statistically, somebody's going to leave.
Well,
Um,
statistically, Luke, some 10% of your church is leaving every year, no matter what. For one
yeah,
reason, they're going
exactly.
to die, they're going to move, somebody's going to get upset.
Yeah,
And when somebody's disgruntled or maybe even it's just personal issues, they're looking for any shift, even if it's simple, is just an easy off ramp.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so I just think this is a leadership principle. If you are trying to please everybody, you're going to lose everybody.
yeah. Well, that's the thing is, you kind of implied earlier with that stat. Statistically, you can't keep anybody. You can't keep everybody. It's just
No,
not going to happen.
no,
And like I said, people are going to leave for on good terms and bad terms. There's no way to prevent them from leaving, though. And
right.
so, like I was saying, the instrument thing could be a little jarring, but kind of like you were saying, if nothing else, you can at least start to maybe introduce new songs. I heard of that's the beauty if you have projection.
Mhm,
You could just project the lyrics, even if you're using hymn books and the song's not in the hymn book. I like what I can't remember who this was, but one pastor, in order to start introducing songs, he kind of would he figured out a way and to kind of I call it clever or just it's really quite brilliant. He was able to kind of introduce a song based on, to some degree, what he was preaching over the next few weeks. So he'd kind of say, hey, we're going to be in a new series about whatever, or in this book, and this song right here really kind of helps us to focus in on the theme of these sermons. And it was a newer song, and
mhm,
they would just sing that every week. And then he'd do it again, then the next, they'd sing that every week for a month. And then, in a month or two, he'd introduce another one,
mhm.
just to get people used to sing. If nothing else, it's getting them used to singing songs that are, not, the same, 50 in your arsenal hymn
Oh,
book.
yeah, so if you have a hymn book of 400 songs, the church may only use 30 or 40 of them. I mean, it's
Oh no,
crazy.
it's true.
Um,
Yeah.
so
I mean,
I would say, but think about this, Luke. Think that the fact is that we're even talking about this, that there's even a world in which this has to be tiptoed through so much. And there's wisdom and patience, there's wisdom in being cautious, proceeding wisely. But isn't it sad that this is even a thing? Like that the most subtle shift from only piano or taking an organ away or having a guy stand up instead of waving his arms, he's playing an acoustic guitar and leading with his energy. That would actually be an issue.
yeah,
I know it's got to grieve the Holy Spirit. It
yeah,
cannot be right.
yeah.
And so I think that's terrible, but it is something that guys have to navigate through. And
Hmm.
I've even seen guys to excuse their screen use, they will actually put the sheet music up on the screens
And
because
then,
it somehow appeases. It's just the hymn book. It's just up on the screen because it's almost like they feel like it's their job as church to teach people like music. And I gotta tell you,
Hmm.
I don't think there's anything that could be further from our objective as the church than to
Yeah.
teach people how to read music. Um, we, I think there's a great case to be made to not use hymn books for a lot of reasons. One of which is your ability to not look down, but to look up and sing
Yeah.
out. It feels but that's all subjective too. But the point is, yeah, I've got subjectivity on my side, and so do you. But let's not try to make it objective. What is
Yeah.
the deal? Why are you trying to take such a hardcore stand on
Yeah.
this?
Well,
And churches are ruined by this stuff.
mhm. Well,
Worship
it's like
rules have slain its tens of thousands.
yeah, it's true, and it's like we've said about many times and many topics that we've talked about as far as really coming down to methodology
Yep.
is if you're a traditional church and you have a stance on more traditional music, more hymn-based, congregational singing, whatever it may be, that's fine. But can we admit that it's simply a preference and
Yes.
not a theological matter?
It
You
would
know,
help. It would help your relationship with other churches, number one. It would ultimately help your people.
yeah.
Example why this hurts people. Okay, so you've got this really strict, stringent IFB music thing going on. But what if this family has to move? And what if
Mm,
there's not another church that dots their I's and crosses their T's just exactly the way you have with music? What you've essentially taught them is that this is a mark of discipleship.
yeah.
This is a mark of health, and we all know it's not.
Mhm.
So then all of a sudden, these people are lost and floundering in an ever dying culture. IFB,
Yeah.
they're going to be lost without
Mhm.
reprogramming.
Mhm.
And fortunately, people can be reprogrammed, and I
Yeah.
love to see it when it happens. But the damage we do to people by binding their consciences to extra biblical stuff, particularly music may be the worst of all of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad.
It's definitely probably the most obvious. It's the
Yeah,
one that's most in your face. I know the King James issue is something, but I mean, it's definitely something as well, but the music is something that it is what your service, it's what begins your service essentially and kind of sets the tone. And yeah, it's a huge thing that people notice.
yeah,
And you talk about helping your people. Another way, Brian, I see that it helps people is they understand when you acknowledge that it's based on preference and tradition and not some type of theological biblical stance. I actually think that if you're going to have a church like that, then that's the only way to retain certain people, many people, is because they may come and they may say, well, the music isn't what I prefer, but I understand that they just do this out of tradition and they have a reason. Their reason is just preferential. Every church has their preference, and they're a little bit more gracious to you because you're more or less gracious to them in your explanation of it.
right.
I've got a good friend right now who he's in the process. He's about my age. He's in the process to take over a very traditional church, and this is the shift he's making. I've noticed in his terminology when he's talking to people that are interested in the church or ask questions. They say, "Hey, I notice other churches do it this way. Why do?" He says, "Hey, look." In this case, this is an older church. We have a rich heritage, and we just honored the heritage and tradition. It's not because we think it's theologically, biblically the way we have to do it. It's just something that we've done out of tradition. And every church has traditions. These are ours, and
That's
we're
smart.
honoring our
That's
particular
super smart, and
preferences in that way.
I so respect that. The
Yeah,
fact is, people can criticize me all they want to for my church did. My church had a heritage, but it was long obliterated, man. This church was about to die.
yeah,
The guys that attacked me and said that I had stolen a church, they didn't know what they're talking about, man. This church had
yeah.
been stolen by the devil long before I ever came.
Well, yeah. By the way, that's like saying that Paul Chappell stole his church. Okay, so Paul Chappell had a very similar
That's
situation. He
exactly.
arrived to what was it called, Antelope Valley Community Church or something,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it was a dead church that he just replanted and relaunched. So for all you independent Baptist haters out there, I'd like to say that Brian,
He took over.
he just took a page out of Paul Chappell's book.
That's right. He took a dead church and took it over and completely redid it.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely
It's
100%.
like planting a church, but you already have a building and a little bit of people to start with.
That is a really good way to look at
Yeah.
that, and it's a story of so many guys. So, yeah, I think as far as worship goes, First of all, you need to get some really solid footing on what you actually believe.
Mm.
When I hear somebody say, I think drums are wrong in church, it just makes me cringe a little bit like, okay, you don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
just, that is a parroted something you heard somebody else say, no forethought, definitely no biblical thought because drums are all over the Bible. It's just a sad thing when you see people doing it like this. I think if we would just be willing to start it all over, like, I'll be honest with you, Chris Tomlin has a great book called Holy Roar, based on his song Holy Roar, which is
Mm.
about worship. And it talks about the 7 different elements of worship, things like hand raise and bowing down, all these things. It's so biblical, so thorough, and we need it. We need that kind of reasonable way to look at things. Now, some other guys might be listening, having these conversations about, let's say they're the youth pastor or the associate pastor, or they're just in a church that is not their preference. Maybe it's more dated than they would like. I would say this: number one, you don't always have to have your preferences. It may be that that church is the very best thing for you and your family for all kinds of reasons. It could be programmatic, it could be philosophical, it could be teaching wise. A lot of reasons why a church with conservative music might be the best thing for you. Like, for instance, if I
Mm.
lived in Fredericksburg, Virginia, I'm going to Kurt Skelly's church for sure. The
Yeah.
music is far more conservative than our music is, but the teaching and the program, especially the teaching, but also the program and what they've got going on, will be a much easy sell for me. I wouldn't even care. I'd just be like, well, I
Hmm.
mean, it's just different.
Hmm.
Get back in my car and listen to my Spotify playlist on my way
Yeah.
home from church. This is not a big deal. So to just be so up in arms about this, there may be another better reason for you to just be faithful and be okay with the difference. On the other hand, um, it if there is, well, I will say it like this: there's certainly not a case. Again, if you're in this conservative church, conservatively, musically conservative church, there's never a case to be disruptive and divisive about the situation. Um, and that would be that'd be a wrong
Hmm.
position to have. And I don't think in and of itself, it would be a reason to, of course, be disruptive or divisive ever, but it certainly wouldn't even probably be a good reason just to leave,
Mm.
just over music. I think
Yeah.
that's a really bad position to have on it. However, if you're on staff and you feel like, okay, let's say youth pastor, let's use youth pastor example, and you just cannot have liberty to teach and model and give an example to the teenagers about what's healthy and what's right and what's good, and you just can't support in that public way, then that's obviously, you probably are looking for a different role, a different
Hmm.
job at some point. By the way, that would be true of anything. I mean, none of these things that we've talked about here should be do or die for churches. Nothing I've ever said. I'm trying to get people to do what I'm doing. I'm just trying to bring some sensibility to the conversation and some common sense reality. And so if you can't have any of that, if it's just the stubborn thing that you just can't tolerate and it's not going to be healthy for you long term, that's obviously when you probably should be, looking to do something different. But it has probably a little to do with music and
Hmm.
probably has to do with
Yeah.
everything else. So I think that's the word I would give to guys that are not leading the organization.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and with leadership in mind, if people do leave, get up in arms over a change in music,
Yep.
then that goes back to a whole. And this could be a whole other conversation, but it goes to a cultural problem in your church, in that you have kind of programmed people, or the your church has programmed people to think that the church is about serving their and meeting their needs, and not about them meeting the needs of others. And that's a whole other conversation that could be had.
Great point.
Yeah. Well, Brian, we've got a great conversation here about worship, and the transition you've made there. There's a lot of other stuff in this kind of in this vein that we could talk about. in terms of making these changes, necessary changes at your church. But I think this is a great kind of place to stop for now, and I'm sure we'll come back to this topic at some point in the future.
Yeah, we'll get some guests on here, but
Yeah.
that we can discuss from the other vantage point. I think it's healthy. That's great, Luke. We'll see you guys next time. God bless you guys. Have a great day.
Thanks again for joining us for this episode, and we really would appreciate it if you could leave us that 5-star review, and then of course share this content with your friends. We want to help as many pastors and church leaders as we can, and be sure to, of course, follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you may listen to podcasts. And go ahead and subscribe to the Church Advance YouTube channel at youtube.com/@churchadvance. This podcast is hosted by Brian Sams. It is co-hosted and produced by myself, Luke Clayton, and the team at mustincrease.com. If you want to connect with Brian, be sure to head over to his website at briansams.com. Well, we really look forward to seeing you again in the next episode as we continue to advance a reformation of fellowship, partnership, and gospel hope amongst Bible-believing pastors and churches right here on Church Advance with Brian Sams.